We'll definitely discover that she's an old friend, because what she talks about is somewhere that you all here have, and something that you already have. You're going to just have it revealed soon. Aminatta Forna is a novelist, and she is currently a chair at the Lannan Center for Poetry at Georgetown University, where she's a fellow. Two of her, her most recent novel is called The Hired Man, and another one which is also a very important and numerously awarded book is Memory of Love. And without further ado, I am here to announce that the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel quite far away from you all. No, don't touch it. Don't break into song, grab the microphone. This is a delight. What a wonderful afternoon I had here listening to people talking about lots of the things that I think about, possibly not quite with such intellectual gravitas, but try to think about. I'm a novelist, so we tend to come at things from a slightly different angle. You know, thinking about that, when I started thinking about this question, and I was asked if I would give this talk, I sort of thought, well, you know, this isn't my subject sphere, it's my life, but it's not my subject sphere. And what would I talk about? Especially in terms of the United States. And then I kind of remembered, you know, I don't even know why I forgot, actually. But when Obama was sort of trying to trace the evolution of a thought, when Obama was elected to the presidency, I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be really interesting, right? For a whole number of reasons. But one of them was that Obama and I share a very similar early life biography. Now, we both have fathers who won scholarships to the West in the 1950s, who were part of what was called the Renaissance generation, who came over to Western countries to study with the idea that they would go back, be part of a professional middle class, lead their countries. Obama Senior came here, my father went to Scotland. They were away from home for years, they married and met local women, and they had little hyphenated children. And so I went through this wonderful period where, when I was being asked questions, as I so often am about my ethnicity, I was able to say, just like Barack Obama. But I also knew, and this is sort of when you think back on the evolution of a thought, I also knew what Obama was going to face, because I was facing it too, right? And I had faced it for so long. It came ultimately as no surprise that he became the first president in the history of the United States to have to show his birth certificate. At the same time, many people all claimed Obama. The Kenyans said he was Kenyan. The Hawaiians said he was Hawaiian. The African Americans said he was African American. And I came across a figure the other day, which I'm reminded of, when I was thinking about this and putting together my piece. 53% of white people think Barack Obama classify him as half white. And I thought, yeah, I bet they do. Right, now he's president. Right, so here was a man being claimed by a whole group of different groups of people, but at the same time being rejected by different groups of people. And that is the experience of the hyphenated identity. Then, so thinking about this, I started thinking about a conservative politician by the name of Norman Tebbit. Does anyone remember Norman Tebbit? Let me tell you all about Norman Tebbit, and I will begin. Those of us who call ourselves British and were of age in 1990 will almost certainly remember the conservative politician Norman Tebbit, who coined the so-called cricket test. Immigrants from Pakistan, the West Indies and India, and other cricket-loving countries, he said, ought to support Britain in matches and not support their countries of origin or ancestry. This was a test of loyalty. If you didn't pass, you shouldn't consider yourself British. Which side do they cheer for? Asked Tebbit. it's an interesting test. Are you still harking back to where you came from, or where you are? I was reminded of Norman Tebbett's cricket test when I was visiting Santa Fe last month. The hotel concierge, hearing my accent, began to talk to me about English soccer and shared with me the information that his favourite team was Manchester United. I know very little about soccer, but I know enough to know that Manchester United is a Premier League club, quite possibly the Premier League club, and that it attracts a following from all around the world. 659 million, according to the BBC, a figure based on data provided by a market research company hired by the soccer club. They reckon there are 108 million Man U fans in China, 35 million in India, 33 million in Nigeria, and 25 million in Mexico. By all means, treat the figure with scepticism, because many, including the BBC, did. But nobody doubted the basis of the idea that Manchester United, a soccer club based in a northern British city, has a global following. The young bartender was from Mexico, an immigrant to the United States. He'd never been to Britain, much less Manchester, so I asked him why he supported the club, and I ribbed him that everyone likes to support a winning team. He answered that he very much admired Wayne Rooney as a sports hero and as an inspiration to young people, and that was the main reason he supported Man U. He admitted, though, that a friend had recently been talking to him about Aston Villa, and he liked what he was hearing. He was thinking, Wayne Rooney aside, that he might make a switch. Now, this was interesting. I remembered living in England during the 1970s and what soccer was like back then. In those days, you didn't choose which team to support as if you were choosing a dish from a menu. You supported the team where you lived. That was the rule. The furthest you might get from that was to support a club in a town or city where you were born or where you'd spent part of your life. But that really was as flexible as the whole thing got. On questions of allegiance, people often talk about soccer as a tribal game. Even fans refer to themselves and their teams as tribes. Sociologists, too, have often used the word tribe, particularly when hooliganism in British soccer reached its height in the 1980s. A tribe is something you were born into, that you defend unto the end. The soccer violence of the 1980s was carried out by tribes of young men united under the flag of local clubs. Birmingham City FC, Millwall, where I live, Chelsea, the young Mexican-Americans' choice of Manchester United, and Aston Villa too. These young men would travel from game to game into each other's territory to wage war. To talk to the concierge in Santa Fe was to hear something entirely different. Here was someone who'd not been born into any British soccer tribe, instead choosing the tribe to which he wished to belong. What's more, the tribe welcomed him. They even wanted to know if there were more like him. Why, you might ask? Well, the BBC certainly speculated that the timing of the announcement of Man U's considerable international fan base might well have something to do with the imminent launch of a share offering on the New York Stock Exchange. At the time, the club was looking for new sponsors who would be excited by the size of their potential reach. The club benefited from all these additional members of its tribe. Way back when tribes were a useful part of the survival game, humans joined into groups, pooled labour, shared care of their offspring, protected each other from wild animals and from members of other rival tribes who might try to raid what they had. Tribes were about resources, maximising, protecting, sharing to the benefit of everyone. Survival outside the tribe was difficult, if not impossible. And you didn't choose the tribe, you were born into it as by birthright, typically by being born of other members of the tribe and in the tribal lands. Sometimes, when the numbers of the tribe dwindled too low to be useful, or when they needed, say, more women, the tribe would bring in new members, sometimes even by kidnapping them from neighbouring tribes. When it was beneficial to the tribe, they welcomed more people, just as Manchester United encourages its supporters. More is better. Other times, a tribe might decide that limiting membership was in its best interests. The one-drop rule, by which a person's race, in this case read tribe, was determined according to whether they possessed a single drop of African blood, is a case in point. Designating larger numbers of people black limited access to the considerable spoils of whiteness and created a larger pool of workers. As a game, psychologists sometimes play with clients in order to give the psychologist a sense of how people identify themselves and their priorities. They ask the individual to answer 10 times without hesitation the question, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? I'm guessing that for most people a couple of things come pretty high up the list. Family, very likely, and nationality too. It's one of the first questions people ask each other after meeting. Name first, and then very soon, so where are you from? As I said, the test is one of identity and priorities and also loyalties. Norman Tebbutt's cricket test was a question of loyalty. If you want to be in the club, he was saying to Britain's immigrant populations, you need to demonstrate your loyalty. The interesting thing about the cricket test is that it plays both ways. Around the time Tebbutt made his controversial statement, I had a conversation with the athlete Linford Christie. Christie emigrated to Britain from Jamaica when he was 5. He went on to become an Olympic gold medal winner running under the Union Jack. He told me that when he won a race, the newspaper headlines declared, Britain's Linford Christie wins gold. But when he lost a race, headlines in the same papers ran, Jamaican-born Linford Christie. When it comes to questions of loyalty and hyphenated identities, the loyalty of each side may be called into question. 25 years ago, when Tebbutt coined the cricket test, was the start of much questioning around issues of identity in Europe. If you'd asked me then whether, decades later, I would still be answering those same questions, I would surely have said no. The nature of the discussions changed, but what's remarkable is not by how much it has changed, but by how little. We are still locked into the same debate of who belongs and on what terms. Post 9/11, the focus has shifted from the immigrant population to the dual passport holder. Following the Paris bombings last month, early news reports focused on whether the perpetrators were dual passport holders. For governments, the dual passport holder is more problematic than, say, the second-generation immigrant, because the split loyalty is already apparently evidenced by holding 2 nationalities. At certain times in my life, I've had more than one passport. I have my British passport, the passport given to me at birth because of my place of birth, and my mother's nationality. I have also held a Sierra Leonean passport, for which I'm eligible on the basis of my father's nationality. The experience of having two passports can be an illuminating one. Can tell you a lot about the state of the world. Anyone who's ever tried to travel with 2 passports, particularly between developing and developed countries, will recognise the situation I'm about to describe. Say I'm travelling to Sierra Leone. I typically book my ticket using my British passport, partly because that's the passport I most often use, but also because non-British passport holders are asked to give details of their right to reside in the UK, which of course I have automatically, but the online form gives no opportunity to declare. At check-in, the clerk will want to see my visa for Sierra Leone, at which point I show my Sierra Leonean passport. That can cause a whole new set of problems, because now the passport numbers on the ticket and my travel documents don't match. When I arrive in Sierra Leone and show my Sierra Leonean passport, the immigration clerk searches it for evidence of my right to live in the UK, and unable to find it, questions me. Back out comes the other passport. The return journey is more complicated, because of course now I'm trying to get into Fortress Europe. I need to leave on my Sierra Leonean passport, but I don't have a visa for the UK in it. Equally, I don't have a visa for Sierra Leone in my British passport, if you're keeping up with this, which the immigration officer will want to mark with an exit stamp. Everything I'm doing is perfectly legal, but it creates confusion, and it's true to say, a great deal of suspicion. On at least 2 occasions I've been taken aside and questioned. Let me just throw into the mix that I have at one point in my life possessed a 3rd passport. It's a New Zealand passport. I became eligible for it when my mother married a New Zealander when I was 5. I was a minor, and at the time New Zealand was keen to encourage people to settle in the country and bolster their tiny population. There was even a joke that New Zealand had more sheep than people. They encouraged people to take up citizenship by making it easy. Back to Manchester United. Nowadays, that New Zealand passport is, for all practical purposes, nigh on impossible for me to use. The one time I tried to get into New Zealand with it, I was questioned at length. On which island had I lived? Where had I been to school? I was honest. I said I'd barely set foot in the country in my life. The government had been kind enough to offer me a passport nonetheless. I stopped just short of taking either of my other passports out and suggesting I enter on one of them instead. In response to the new anxieties created by the dual passport holder, namely threats linked with terrorism, Britain has passed a law to allow naturalised citizens convicted of terrorist activity to be stripped of their nationality. Canada recently began invalidating the passports of naturalised citizens who go to fight in the Middle East. In the US, Senator Ted Cruz has tried to propose similar laws. Nothing I've read suggests that there are substantial grounds for believing that the main perpetrators of terrorism are dual passport holders. If my experience of owning more than one passport is anything to go by, we move through the world no more easily than anyone else. So this, rather, is designed as an appeasement to the wider citizenry, to show that something is being done, a crackdown on those with shared loyalties. Anxieties about shared loyalties continue to vex, even concerning those not suspected of international terrorism. Writing in The Week, the columnist and Freedom Foundation researcher, Shika Dalmia, said, "Today, a new twist on this old worry has emerged. It concerns so-called transnational immigrants like me, who like to maintain what Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, whose parents are Indian emigres, last week derisively called hyphenated identities. If you want to be Indian, stay in India," advised Jindal, who himself gave up Hinduism, the religion of his birth, and embraced Christianity. Like Dalmia, I self-identify as belonging to more than one culture. I fought for at least a decade with newspapers about how my national and ethnic origins should be described. I reject the hyphen, which to me looks far too much like a minus sign. Black minus British, Irish minus American. Always I asked to be described as British and Sierra Leonean. I did this after many years of being described in various ways. British born, Sierra Leonean. British of Sierra Leonean origin, or having my Scots mother erased from the picture altogether and described simply as Sierra Leonean. Never, notably, have I been described by a British paper as Scottish. I am both. I belong to both worlds, not just culturally and physically, but physically. I move between them. I have family in both, own property in both, pay taxes in both. I now live in the United States, where I also pay taxes. As a so-called transnational, I belong to a growing class of people. If we are, as I would argue, I would say the difference lies in a few specifics. The hyphenated identity is created defensively, in opposition to a dominant culture which is not fully accepting of its hyphenated members, who typically belong to immigrant groups. The transnational may be an immigrant or have immigrant parents or parents from two nations, but crucially chooses to retain links with both, often moving between the two. The transnational identity is self-defining more so than the hyphenated identity. This is Pico Iyer's global soul, self-realised, self-confident, and notably freer from the anxieties about the need to belong than the hyphenated identity. The hyphenated identity is effectively bestowed, its members excluded from the single national identity. The transnational, on the other hand, would reject the single identity even if it were offered. The transnational actively claims more than one culture, locality, and home. Ask psychologists' question, "Who are you?" The transnational produces a multiplicity of answers relating to nationality and ethnicity and sees no contradiction. British and Sierra Leonean, Afrikaner, Londoner, now resident of Washington, DC. The self-identifying transnational poses a potentially greater threat to structures of power and cultural dominance than the hyphenated identity. Let's go back to Manchester United. While gathering vast numbers of supporters suits the club very well, maximising the potential for income through merchandising and viewing figures, if becoming a supporter brought with it profitable privileges, we would soon see the goalposts policed. The people who would do that would be the core members, let's say the team, the management, perhaps the subscribing members of the official fan club. Strategies would be employed for limiting full access. I'm sure locality would be one. But it would remain in the club's interests to hold on to the mass of supporters, right? There would be grades of membership. The hyphenated identity imposed as it is from above does the same job. Not fully American, not fully British, not fully eligible for all the benefits of belonging. In the early 1970s, I had my Sierra Leonean passport withdrawn. The country's emerging autocracy banned dual nationality, in a classic move straight from the potentate's handbook. Dual nationals are, or at least tended in those days, to be middle class and educated, possessed of another perspective, just the kind of people anyone planning to dispossess a country of its democracy least wants around. In times of heightened political tension, identity as nationhood often becomes an either-or question. The hyphenated identity is forced to choose, or to risk having the choice made for them. The writer Slavenka Drakulic, in her essay People from Three Borders, describes living in Istria, enclosed by Italy, Slovenia and Croatia, as the nationalist Yugoslav wars gathered pace. I feel the burden of the question that Istrians are asked today: who are you? Not in the metaphysical sense, but in a very concrete one. People are asked that directly or indirectly. It means, are you Croat? Are you a proper Croat? Are you patriotic enough? That is, are you nationalist? Visiting journalists from the three states could make no sense of the answers from Istrians when they asked the question, who are you? Drakulic writes, to the Croat reporter, the people said they were Croats. To the Italian reporters, they were, of course, Italians. And the Slovene reporters were told they were Slovene. The locals saw no contradiction in claiming three different nationalities. Neither would they describe themselves as opportunists. In their view, the misunderstanding lies in the fact that the journalists were posing a simple either-or question. To the reporters, it was impossible for one person to be a Croat, an Italian, and a Slovene all at the same time. The journalists saw the villagers' nationalities as political categories. The villagers were talking about their own identity, of which their nationalities were only a part. There is Carlo Carletto, who is a Croat by morning and Italian in the evening. Another villager held three passports from Croatia, where he was born, Slovenia, where he worked, and Italy, which in 1992, a year into the Croatian conflict, allowed Istrians born before 1955 to adopt Italian nationality, a move the Croatians interpreted as an attempt to annex Istria. A few years ago, following the civil war in Sierra Leone, my Sierra Leonean passport was reinstated. Dual nationality for holders of Sierra Leonean passports was allowed once more, a policy instituted, incidentally, at the insistence of the international community tasked with rebuilding the nation, of which both Britain and America, two countries now removing or threatening to withdraw the passports of undesirable dual citizens, were a part. The novelist Jhumpa Lahiri described her immigrant parents. They always feel like they have a foot in separate boats on the water, and each boat is floating and wanting to go in its own direction, and you're sort of stuck in between, not knowing which way to go. Lahiri includes herself in the same description. But what if, like the young Mexican, the soccer supporter decides to offer his allegiance elsewhere? What does this mean for the core membership of the soccer team who have, up until then, been the ones to decide who is in and who is out? In the same way, the transnational citizen is a threat to the core membership's rule-making power. Less by sudden switches of allegiance than by seizing the initiative, by choosing to create their own identity, one which does not depend upon acceptance. Denied access to the privileges they feel they deserve, the transnational is considerably more prepared and better positioned to seek them elsewhere. Identity is constructed through clothes, food, music, literature, language, traditions, national holidays, religions, sports, and so on. Those who belong to the dominant culture subscribe to its values and reinforce their place within it by so doing. Those who wish to belong follow suit. For some of us, though, passing is an impossibility. Our dual heritage is worn on the skin. There came a time when, having answered questions about my identity for decades, I became less interested in the question than in the questioner. It came up constantly, every time I was introduced, every time I was interviewed. The questioners are always, almost without exception, from the dominant group, in this case, white Westerners. Over time, I concluded that I was acting as a lightning rod for the anxieties of other people. My feeling, which is only a guess, is that for some people the sense of belonging, their place in the herd, is what gives them their crucial to their construction of their own identity. If they were asked the question, who are you? Unlike the good people of Istria, nationality would come right up there at the top of their list. From lesser groups, from immigrants and minorities, the dominant group may demand greater assimilation. It may require oaths of allegiance, English language learning, and the adoption of certain codes of behaviour as a condition of belonging. Or it may pursue policies of multiculturalism and choose to tolerate difference, and that it may do to a greater or lesser degree. On the marginalisation of minorities in America, the writer Junot Diaz said, "I think it's not so simplistic that it's like, oh, this is a white-only country, you know. It's by having both strategies that you're able to obscure how the prerogative of white privilege has been maintained despite what appears to be, on the surface, an opening and multiculturalisation of what we call our society." Accordingly, the hyphenated identity may resist or concede to the different pressures, but ultimately, in the push and pull of cultural power, the hyphenated identity does not greatly threaten the order of things, namely the balance of power itself. The shape-shifting transnational, possessor of sometimes multiple identities and a non-exclusive and elastic sense of home, however, is a different beast. One who dares to say, "I'm happy to feel mainly or sufficiently at home in several places than entirely at home in just one." If homesickness is, as psychologists tell us, merely an adjustment disorder, then the transnationals who do not know the feeling of homesickness are surely the best adjusted. This individual rootedness, which defines its own notions of self and place, carries an authority entirely of its own making. The weakness of government policies of both multiculturalism and assimilation has been to treat culture as fixed. The self-identified transnational sees culture as mutable, is well placed to see both the advantages and disadvantages of different cultures, their strengths and weaknesses. It's no wonder that those artists who stand at the crossroads of cultures have used their vantage point to recognise and to explore this mutability, both in subject and form. In my own sphere of literature, Salman Rushdie on religiosity, the novels of Junot Diaz and Alexander Heman recently reconfiguring the language and style of the English novel. English language novel, I should say. Helen Oyeyemi fusing Yoruba myth with the legends of medieval Europe. Leila Lalami, the most recent novelist of many to redirect the focus of colonial history. Hari Kunju examining the universal origins of religion. Myself deliberating a European civil conflict from the perspective of an African one. And just to hone my point, in discussions of transnational writing and writers, our inclusion or exclusion from the national canons of the countries where we live, there you would find a microcosm of this entire discussion. Transnationals like us could never have existed in this way at any other time. Our existence depends on global transport links, perhaps a certain income level too, though not as much as one might expect given the number of conversations I've enjoyed with African and Indian origin taxi drivers who run businesses or own property in their first country. Now, more than ever, identity is composed of many layers, the orders of which may have changed or be changing. Nationality may no longer come high up on the list in answer to the question, who are you? Religion, as has been amply demonstrated, is already more significant for many. Class, perhaps? I played this game with my husband, actually, who's an Englishman, and I was really astonished that the very second answer he gave was middle class. I went, what? Okay, but father, then middle class. I thought, that is the English for you. Class, perhaps. Soccer. I'm joking about soccer, though only slightly, because professional footballers represent some of the world's most dedicated transnationals. Didier Drogba was raised in France and the Ivory Coast, has played for Chelsea and Montreal Impact, and captained the Ivorian World Cup team. Karim Benzema is a Frenchman of Algerian descent. He lives in Spain, plays for Real Madrid at local level, and France at national level. Alex Song holds French and Cameroonian passports, played locally for West Ham and Barcelona, and despite being offered the chance to play internationally for France, chose to do so for Cameroon. Diego Costa, born and raised in Brazil, is a naturalised Spaniard who plays for Spain's national team and even represented them in the World Cup hosted by Brazil. The rest of the time, Costa plays professional soccer for Chelsea in England. Deco was born in Brazil, played for Barcelona and Chelsea, became a naturalised Portuguese citizen and played on Portugal's World Cup team. Bojan Kric, who's played for Stoke Newington in England, declined Serbia's entreaties to play for his fatherland and opted to play for his motherland, Spain, instead. According to Washington's Migration Policy Institute, the assumption that people will live their lives in one place according to one set of national and cultural norms in countries with impermeable national borders no longer holds. Rather, in the 21st century, more and more people will belong to two or more societies at the same time. This is what many researchers refer to as transnational migration. Transnational migrants work, pray, and express their political interests in several contexts rather than in a single nation state. Some will put down root to the host country, maintain strong homeland ties, and belong to religious and political movements that span the globe. These allegiances are not antithetical to one another. Not all transnationals and transnational migrants are the same. Some will be born transnational, others will choose transnationalism, still others will selectively choose transnational practices to a greater or lesser degree. Nationhood will become only one determinant of the transnational identity. Religion, in particular Islam, has already for millions risen to the fore, as I've said. I believe, as a Londoner myself, that cities will grow to greater prominence as signifiers of identity, as many rise to rival the power of nation-states. I imagine, for example, that a younger generation will come to think of themselves more so, or at least as much, as residents of Bombay as India, Hong Kong or Shanghai as China, Lagos as Nigeria, just as Londoners and New Yorkers already do. More than half the world already lives in cities, a figure projected to rise to 67% by 2050. There are now 28 megacities, meaning those with populations of over 10 million. Up on just 10 in 1990. Cities offer the cosmopolitanism, the fluidity of culture and belonging that the transnational already feels, as well as greater opportunities for self-advancement beyond traditional constraints. A self-chosen transnational identity may be the only sane response to the precarious position of the formerly hyphenated identity. Identity will become less rigid, more elastic, not a matter of either or, but of and but. Transnationalism is not new, but the conditions of transnationalism are changed rapidly due to the greater ease of the flow of capital, including human capital, transport and communication links. And the rise of transnationalism requires a more sophisticated and considered response from nationalist leaders, many of whom are currently pursuing increasingly nationalist tendencies. In all but a very few countries, the collision of racial, political, geographical and cultural identities of natural cultures is a thing of the past. That ship has sailed. So, finally, do I pass the cricket test? No, I don't, inasmuch as I take it to have been designed to apply to me. The only time I've had to make a choice was when the Sierra Leone national team played my local soccer club, Millwall, a League One team with an unsavoury reputation for racism, but which these days fields players from Trinidad, Jamaica and the Comoros. I supported Sierra Leone. Like almost everyone I know with one foot in the developing world, my tendency is to support any poor country over any rich one, regardless of whether or not the poor or the rich country is my own. Maybe I don't care enough about cricket or soccer or nationality, or maybe after years of identifying with the underdog, it's just what you do. Thank you, Susanna.